Mr Deputy President, I move that this bill be now read a second time. Mr Deputy President, I'm extremely pleased to introduce the Human Tissue Amendment Trafficking in Human Organs Bill 2016. Mr Deputy President, this bill would make it a crime for citizens of New South Wales to receive organs sourced by illegal and unethical means, even where that occurred overseas. This includes organ harvesting, where organs are removed from people without their consent; organ trafficking, where often poor and vulnerable people are taken advantage of and their organs sold, often resulting in lifelong medical complications. Mr Deputy President, this is a serious matter, and that's why the maximum penalty of 25 years imprisonment would apply, where the removal of the organs could reasonably have been expected to have killed the person from whom they were removed. Mr Deputy President, by New South Wales adopting this law, it would be moving into what is increasingly becoming a mainstream approach to organ harvesting around the world. We've seen similar action like this already taken in Spain, in Taiwan, and in Israel. And the extraterritorial operation of this law is essential for it to be effective. It is rare, but it is not unheard of for laws of New South Wales to govern the actions of our citizens and residents wherever they are on the planet. Most recently, this Parliament moved to apply the operation of Australia's surrogacy laws to residents of New South Wales, whether they were in the state or out of the state. We have similar laws that apply extraterritoriality that applies in relation to child sexual exploitation, wherever that happens on the planet. And the model used in this bill to apply the operations of the provisions of this bill to make it a crime to engage in the illegal or unethical trade of organs anywhere on the planet is modelled on the extraterritorial operation of those bills. Mr Deputy President, this bill is the result of a lengthy consultation process that started in 2013, and it included community members, law reform groups, medical professionals, the legal sector and academics, among many others. We have received input from literally thousands of stakeholders and members of the community, and that collectively has helped shape the form of the bill that I present to the House today. The response from the community has been overwhelming, and indeed petitions supported by a near record 294,745 members of the community have been tabled in this House supporting the provisions of this bill and this legislation. And why have they done that? Well, Mr Deputy President, the global organ trade is growing, and with it comes the temptation for residents from this state to travel overseas and buy an organ that is sourced by unethical means. And we need, as a legislative chamber, to send a strong message that we do not tolerate such behaviour from residents in this state, and we will not accept them engaging in it overseas. And we must not support a world where, quite literally, someone overseas is killed to order to provide an organ to prolong the life for someone in this state. Of all of the interactions that I think strengthened my resolve to bring this bill was a discussion with Mr Jeremy Chapman, a transplant surgeon in New South Wales and somebody who's taken sometimes criticised, sometimes supporting role in trying to address the illegal and unethical trade of organs around the planet. And he recalled a conversation he had with a colleague who had contacted him because she had an ethical dilemma. She was a renal surgeon, and she'd had a patient call to say that they would not be attending for dialysis on the Monday because she was going to China. They were just about to shoot her donor. And we must not allow that to become an ordinary practice in this state. The benefits of this bill, of course, becoming law will go beyond the actual terms of the bill and the prescriptive criminal elements of the bill. It will serve a strong social and educational function. The bill will raise awareness among medical practitioners and the community around the state, and hopefully around Australia, about the practice of organ harvesting and the illegal trade in human tissue that is a sadly growing problem on the planet. It also puts those involved in organ trafficking or potentially wanting to engage in that deeply unethical trade on notice that citizens and residents of New South Wales will no longer be able to participate in this inhuman trade. We have an opportunity, Mr Deputy President, to set an example to other parliaments within Australia and globally about the use of our legislative powers, about the use of our collective strength to send a strong message condemning unethical organ harvesting and trafficking no matter where it occurs on the planet. It would also serve to direct attention to the need to improve organ donation rates in Australia and New South Wales, where we lag woefully behind some of the better performing jurisdictions in the country. And in that regard, I'd note specifically the arrangements that operate in Spain, where there is an opt-out provision for organ donations. They are arrangements which I personally strongly support. But it is clear that one of the reasons why people in this state turn to the organ black market is because the waiting lists in Australia to access an organ are so long that many people literally die waiting to get their organ. That cannot be sustained either. As part of putting this bill forward, I would like to indicate that I'm an organ donor. And those of you who think that it's simply enough to have the notation on your driver's licence are wrong. In the last 10 years, the system has changed. And I would strongly encourage people to take that further step and actively note that they are a willing donor. I'd strongly encourage every member of this House to get online and register that you are willing to be a donor in the event of your death. Just as New South Wales should act to stop organ trafficking globally, so in this place we have a responsibility to do what we can on a personal and professional level. To do this, you need to join the Australian Organ Donor Register and go to donatelife.gov.au. And then, in a matter of 5 minutes, provided you have your Medicare card with you, you can actively register and become a donor. And then I'd urge you to speak with your family members and advise them of your willingness to become a donor so that they are not surprised by it and resist it in the case your organs are needed. We have that joint obligation to fix donation rates here, but also prevent our citizens engaging in the unethical trade overseas. Mr Deputy President, to look at the specifics of the bill. The objects of this bill are A, to increase the penalty for commercial trading in human organs and other human tissue, and B, to create offences relating to the use of organs and other tissue taken from people without their consent, and C, to impose a duty on registered health practitioners to report any reasonable suspicion that they have that a patient or other person has received an organ or tissue that was commercially traded or taken without appropriate consent. The offence of trading in tissues or organs has a prescribed maximum penalty of 40 penalty units or imprisonment for 6 months or both. Where the amount of tissue taken would reasonably be expected to kill a person, or where a vital organ is removed, well then the maximum penalty, quite rightly, is set at 25 years imprisonment. The removal of tissues without consent from a living or dead person has a maximum penalty of 40 penalty units or 6 months imprisonment. And again, where the organ removed is a vital organ, then the maximum penalty is set at 25 years imprisonment. Using tissues removed without consent or receiving for transplantation issues or organs so acquired carries matching penalties. There are exclusions for blood products, there are exclusions for hair, and there are exclusions for semen in the course of this bill. The bill introduces mandatory reporting for registered health practitioners who have reasonable grounds to suspect that a patient or other person has been transplanted with or received tissue that was either trafficked or removed without consent. The bill specifies that failure to comply with mandatory reporting requirements is considered unsatisfactory professional conduct, and that can result depending on the discretion of the oversight body, in suspension of the medical practitioner from practising medicine, or even, in the most extreme case, removal of a practitioner's name from the register. Mr Deputy President, under the existing law of New South Wales, trading in tissue within the state is prohibited. But of course that law does not extend to transplants that may occur overseas. There is anecdotal evidence from medical practitioners that residents of New South Wales have engaged in unethical organ transplants overseas, receiving organs or tissues that were either purchased on the black market or taken from people without consent. This was confirmed by correspondence from the New South Wales Health Minister that was received as early as January 2013, where the correspondence noted New South Wales clinicians involved in the care of patients who may benefit from transplantation actively inform them of the risks of travelling overseas for the procedure. Anecdotally, a very small number of individuals in New South Wales requiring transplantation travel overseas to access organs. Of course, the numbers are now clearer from the from the National Register, and we know that dozens of people from Australia have travelled overseas to acquire organs, and the source of those organs, the ethical restraints on those organs, is simply not considered by Australian authorities. Mr Deputy President, two forces have acted together to make the trade in trafficked organs so lucrative. The first is medical advances that have made organ transplantation more widespread, more affordable and more successful. And indeed, Australia and New South Wales has played a proud part in developing the skills and the capacity to allow for organ transplantation. Some of our largest teaching hospitals, some of our finest universities have honed the skills and the talents for organ transplantation. But of course, in part, that has created a problem because New South Wales, places such as the University of Sydney, my alma mater, has indeed trained transplant surgeons that are now core players in the illegal and unethical trade in China. And topping that would be Mr Wang Jiefu, who was shamefully given honorary professorship from that university, notwithstanding the fact that he has openly admitted to engaging in the transplantation of livers from hundreds and hundreds of executed prisoners in China. Now, the second is that across the globe, organ donation rates remain low, and despite the occasional success, such as we see in Spain, remain low across the planet. This means that many people who are waiting for transplants will never receive a matching organ. This can and does present an incentive for some governments and organs to forcibly, or at the very least unethically, obtain organs from their citizens, especially from vulnerable people, such as prisoners, minority ethnic groups, like the Uyghur people, and religious groups, such as House Christians and the Falun Gong in China. Whilst most countries have laws expressly prohibiting both the sale and forced removal of human organs, compelling evidence suggests that the practice continues to be widespread in a number of countries around the globe. We know organ harvesting is a problem in countries in our region such as China. We also know that organ trafficking is a real and recognised problem in countries including Brazil and Colombia, in Ecuador, Georgia, Haiti, India, Mexico, the Philippines, Russia and the USA. And recent, very troubling evidence has emerged that Egypt is increasingly a source for unethically traded organs, the profits from which are diverted to terror links within the Middle East. And I think we should be clear about the financial incentive available for a government or an organisation or a criminal gang to have somebody killed to order for their organs. Conservative estimates suggest that the value of a person's organs sold at open market and distributed to unethical recipients who are willing to pay, the organs themselves can receive a price that exceeds $250,000 US. There are many people on this planet that governments and criminal organs see more valuable for their spare parts than as whole humans. In a number of countries, organ sales are disguised as donations, with few, if any, records being kept to prove consent to donate organs. This suggests that actual informed consent is at best unlikely. There are also no requirements for ongoing cover of the medical expenses of donors or so-called donors, and many of those selling organs may be unaware of the ongoing medical issues they can face as a result. And there has been case after case after case of this being documented in countries in our region, such as the Philippines, as well as in India, where impoverished people are given $200, $300, $400, $500 Australian, equivalent of that, to have a kidney removed in brutal, unsanitary conditions, and then left with the lifelong consequences of a botched operation. And we cannot allow residents from New South Wales to be a part of that problem. The World Health Organization has identified organ trafficking as something that, in their words, is likely to take unfair advantage of the poorest and most vulnerable groups, undermines altruistic donation, and leads to profiteering and human trafficking. Globally, there is strong evidence that it is a multi-billion-dollar industry and it continues to grow. Mr Deputy President, I'd like to note the support this bill has had from members of the community, including those who are here in the chamber today, and I thank you for attending, but also from organisations such as the Australian Lawyers for Human Rights. We've had representations in support from the Human Rights Relief Foundation, whose chairman said, "We believe that the passing of this legislation is a positive and important step for Australia to keep abreast of legislative responses in other jurisdictions around the world, and B, is important to raise awareness among legal practitioners and the wider community about the practice of organ harvesting and the illegal trade in human tissue." We have support from the Vietnamese Australian Lawyers Association, who say that the legislation will ensure that the most vulnerable are protected from the unconscionable conduct for financial advantage. We have support from QT Lawyers and Associates. We have support from the Australian Council for Human Rights Education, who says in part this, from Dr. Sev Azdalski: "We believe that the passing of this legislation is especially important to stop the practice of organ harvesting in a number of countries, including China, where there is a history of selling organs from executed prisoners and prisoners of conscience. As you would know, there is evidence that residents of New South Wales have purchased illegally obtained organs for transplantation. Legislative initiatives such as this contribute to addressing the problem of global organ trafficking and forced organ harvesting." We have support from Wendy Rogers of Macquarie University. And Ms Rogers is a Professor of Clinical Ethics, Department of Philosophy and Department of Clinical Medicine, and Deputy Director of the Macquarie University Research Centre for Agency, Values and Ethics. And amongst other things, Professor Rogers says, "While the actual numbers of New South Wales residents who travel to receive illegally trafficked organs may be small, this proposed amendment sends a strong message that the New South Wales Government cares about the plight of those from whom trafficked organs are sourced, no matter where in the world they reside. Organ trafficking in its most extreme forms amounts to a crime against humanity. In China, prisoners of conscience are routinely killed in demand for their organs. We should do anything that is in our power to prevent abuses such as this. By passing this amendment, the New South Wales Government will send a strong message that it does not tolerate abuses of human rights, and in particular that it does not tolerate New South Wales residents seeking to further their own health interests at the cost of disadvantaged and abused citizens of other countries." And Professor Rogers also states that as follows: "I have spoken with a number of transplant doctors who are in broad support of aspects of the proposed amendment, including a judicial process to determine guilt." She goes on to note that there is ongoing conversations within the medical profession about the provisions in the bill that deal with unsatisfactory professional conduct. And I look forward to contributions from other members of the House that deal with those difficult issues for medical practitioners, which we accept is a difficult and balancing act in terms of protecting human rights and ensuring the maintenance of the doctor-patient relationship remains strong in this state. Mr Deputy President, we also have support from the Sunrise Daily, the first and only Vietnamese daily newspaper in Australia, and support from the Vietnamese community in Australia, the New South Wales chapter, whose president, Dr Peter Thang Ha, says, "I'm writing to you in my capacity as the President of the Vietnamese community in Australia, New South Wales chapter. I'm aware of the above-mentioned draft bill, and on behalf of our constituents, I wish to advise our support for the passing of the bill. On behalf of the Vietnamese Australians in Australia, many of whom have experienced oppression and denial of human rights in the past and during the Vietnam War, I believe that it is important for us to support bills such as this, which will assist to protect human rights on a global scale. We believe that this bill is important as it sends a strong message to the international community that Australia is willing to support international human rights. Mr. Deputy President, this bill is timely, this bill is necessary. This bill would make New South Wales a global citizen and would ensure that our beliefs that human life is precious, that nobody's life can be bought and sold for the benefit or the saving of another, we would make that firm statement with the passage of this bill. Mr. Deputy President, I thank the members of the community who have supported this bill. I look forward to ongoing discussions with members of the House for the passage of this bill. It's time for New South Wales to act, and I commend the bill to the House.